You step off a long-haul flight at JFK, returning to the US after about 5 months abroad. You're exhausted, your internal clock is upside down, and all you want is to get back to your place, your job, and your normal routine. You follow the crowd through the terminal like you've done before, wait your turn at immigration, and when you reach the counter, you hand over your green card. The officer runs it through the scanner. The device beeps. You're expecting a quick check and then to be waved through. Instead, the officer hesitates. Curious. His eyes stay on the screen. His expression shifts slightly, and then he looks up. "Please step over here for a moment," he says. Another officer approaches with a tablet and points to a camera. Exhales sharply. Look straight ahead. Stay still. Neutral expression. A light flashes as your face is captured. You assume it's standard security, just another layer of checks. What you don't see is what's happening behind that camera. That image isn't just stored as a simple photograph. It becomes part of a biometric profile tied to your identity, your passport or green card number, and a record of every time you've entered or left the US. And for green card holders, there has been a quiet but important shift in how this information is now being used. As soon as your green card is scanned, the system can pull up your full border crossing history. Every departure, every return, the exact number of days you spent outside the country on each trip. This isn't reconstructed from smudged passport stamps or incomplete records. It's drawn from biometric entry-exit data now routinely captured at many U.S. airports. Next to your name on the officer's screen, a number appears. Maybe it shows 120 days abroad. Maybe 183. Maybe 210. That number represents how long you've been outside the U.S. on this latest trip. Once that number reaches certain ranges, the way the officer handles your case can change. What might have been a quick routine admission can turn into a more serious review. The officer is no longer just verifying your identity and that your card is valid. He now has to consider a legal question. Were you on a temporary trip, or have you, in practical terms, stopped living in the U.S. as your main home? At this first stage, he doesn't need to prove anything. All he has to do is start asking you questions. And the way you respond when you're jet-lagged, stressed, and desperate to get out of the airport can create statements that may later be interpreted as evidence about your intentions and where your real home is. Many green card holders assume the main risk is the biometric camera itself. In reality, the crucial factor is what the system already knows before you say a word. Your travel timeline is already visible, down to the exact day. The officer doesn't really need to ask, "How long were you away?" It's on the screen in front of him. So instead, he moves directly to the more important question. Why were you outside the United States for such a long time? What happens in the next few minutes can influence whether you walk straight out to baggage claim and go home, or whether you're directed to secondary inspection, handed forms related to possible abandonment of your green card, and suddenly find your future in the U.S. under serious review. I'm Artur, and in this video, I'm going to break down what is actually happening at U.S. airports under the expanded biometric entry-exit system, and why permanent residents who take longer trips abroad are facing more detailed questions. I'll explain in clear, simple language 3 main things: what the system does every time you travel, why extended absences can raise red flags, and how to respond at the border in a way that is honest but doesn't unnecessarily damage your situation. This video is for general information only and does not constitute legal, immigration, or financial advice. Everyone's case is different, so please consult a qualified professional about your specific circumstances. To understand what's happening at the airport, we need to start with the technology. For a long time, the U.S. has been collecting fingerprints from many arriving travelers. That part isn't new. What changed with the expansion of the biometric entry-exit program is that facial recognition became a standard tool for processing almost all non-U.S. citizens, visitors, students, temporary workers, and yes, green card holders. When you arrive, a camera takes your picture. When you leave, another image is captured. Each of those images is matched to you using facial recognition technology and linked to a specific crossing, date, location, and whether it was an entry or an exit. Over the years, this builds a detailed digital timeline of your travel in and out of the U.S. These systems are designed to retain data long-term. Official policies often allow storage for many years. That means every trip you make adds another data point to your long-term travel record. For people on temporary visas, this information is frequently used to detect overstays. For lawful permanent residents, the use is different. The key question becomes, are you actually residing in the United States as your primary home, or are you essentially living somewhere else and using your green card to visit occasionally? Permanent residency is built around one central concept, that the U.S. is your main place of residence. The law generally expects you to live primarily in the United States and to treat trips abroad as temporary. You are absolutely allowed to leave the country. You can go overseas to visit relatives, handle emergencies, maintain property, or spend time in your country of origin. Millions of permanent residents do exactly that every year. But when a trip becomes very long, or when there's a pattern of long trips, especially without planning in advance, immigration officers may start to question whether your real home is still in the United States. This is where the so-called 6-month rule causes confusion. Many green card holders believe there is a strict, automatic rule. If you're outside the U.S. for more than 6 months, you lose your green card. That's not how the law actually operates. There is no single day, like day 183, when your status automatically disappears. What does change after an absence of around 6 months or more is how your situation is viewed. A longer trip makes it easier for an officer to argue that you might no longer be truly residing in the U.S. and may have shifted your main life abroad. It doesn't automatically cancel your status, but it does make your case more vulnerable to challenge. Years ago, when officers wanted to evaluate your time outside the U.S., they often had to rely on questions and passport stamps. People forgot exact dates. Some stamps were missing or unclear. There was a lot of guesswork. With biometric entry-exit data, that guesswork is largely gone. When your card is scanned now, the system might show something like last departure, June 1st, current arrival, December 10th. Total days outside, 192. That figure is pulled directly from the digital record. So instead of spending time trying to piece together when you left, the officer can immediately focus on why you were away that long and whether your trip appears temporary or more like a relocation. This is where many green card holders unintentionally make their situation harder. They think the safest thing to do is to give a complete, detailed story. My mother was very sick, and I had to stay and look after her. Then my business ran into problems. Airfare became too expensive. Then my brother needed help. I always meant to come back, but one thing after another kept delaying me. On a human level, that is very understandable. But in the immigration process, your detailed explanation doesn't get transcribed word for word. Officers are trained to write short, factual notes about what you say. Instead of your full emotional story, the written record might simply say, "Traveler remained abroad to care for family member. Traveler stayed overseas to manage business and property." Those one-line summaries can later be read as evidence of strong family, financial, and daily life ties outside the U.S. Even a comment like, "I didn't realize the trip had become so long," can turn into a note such as, "Traveler unaware of permanent resident residency obligations." The problem here is not that you're telling the truth. You should always be honest with immigration officers. Giving false information can create far more serious issues. The real issue is how your truth is being captured and presented. Long, unstructured answers given when you're exhausted tend to highlight everything that is happening in your life abroad and give relatively little weight to your ongoing connections to the U.S. When those statements are combined with a clearly documented long absence, an officer, or later an immigration judge, may decide that you effectively stopped living in the U.S., even if you never thought of it that way. When U.S. immigration law evaluates whether someone has abandoned their permanent residence, it usually doesn't rely on a single fact. Instead, it applies what is often called a totality of the circumstances approach. The overall picture of your life is examined. Some of the key factors often considered include: do you have a job or business in the United States? Did you keep a home or apartment in the U.S. while you were abroad? Are you filing U.S. tax returns as a resident? Is your spouse or are your children living in the U.S.? Do you have active U.S. bank accounts, bills, and other ongoing obligations here? Throughout your time abroad, Did you intend to return and keep the U.S. as your primary home? You can see how these facts can tell very different stories. Take two people who each spent 7 months outside the U.S. Person A stayed abroad to care for an ill parent, but kept their U.S. job, continued paying for their U.S. apartment, and filed their U.S. tax return as a resident. Person B spent the same length of time abroad, closed their U.S. accounts, ended their lease, and accepted full-time employment in another country. On paper, both were gone for 7 months. But the overall picture those facts create is completely different. The challenge is that the airport is not a courtroom. You don't have hours to explain your entire situation with documents, and you usually don't have a lawyer present. You have a short interaction, often after a long and tiring flight, with an officer who must make a relatively quick decision. Because of this, many immigration attorneys recommend a simple communication strategy for permanent residents returning from extended trips. Stay calm, be truthful, answer exactly what you are asked, and keep your answers focused on the fact that your true home remains in the United States. Think of it as disciplined, controlled communication. If the officer asks, "Why were you away for 6 months and 2 weeks?" A focused answer could be, "I was visiting family and handling personal matters, but my home and main life are in the United States, and I always intended to return." That answer is honest, concise, and it clearly emphasizes the legal point that matters. Your primary residence is in the U.S. and the trip was temporary. If the officer follows up with, "What ties do you have in the U.S.?" that is your opportunity to briefly and clearly list them. Your job, your lease or home, your spouse or children, your regular bills, your tax filings, and any other ongoing commitments. You don't need to argue, and you don't need to go into every emotional detail about your time abroad. Just calmly present the concrete facts that show your life is centered in the U.S. Short, factual answers both cooperate with the process and keep attention on your residence in the United States, the key legal issue. Even if you answer well, the officer may still decide to send you to secondary inspection. You'll be taken to another area, asked to sit and wait, and your case will be reviewed more thoroughly. This can be uncomfortable and stressful, but being sent to secondary by itself does not mean you're losing your green card. It generally means the officer wants more time, more questions, or a second opinion before deciding how to proceed. In secondary inspection, the questions may become more detailed. They may ask again about your travel, your work, your address, your family, and they may type notes while you speak. This is often when travelers become so anxious that they just want the situation to end as quickly as possible. In that state, some people will say almost anything to get out of the room, or they may sign forms they haven't fully read or understood. One of the most serious documents that sometimes appears in this context is a form where you confirm that you are voluntarily giving up your permanent resident status. In simple terms, signing that kind of form is the same as agreeing to surrender your green card. Many people who signed such forms later say they did not realize the full consequences at the time. They were overwhelmed and only thinking about ending the stress or getting out of the airport. Immigration attorneys consistently caution, do not sign any document that gives up your permanent residence unless you truly intend to abandon your status and fully understand what you are agreeing to. If an officer suggests that you sign something like this and you want to keep your green card, you can respond calmly and respectfully with something like, "I do not want to abandon my permanent resident status. I would like to speak with an immigration attorney or have this reviewed by an immigration judge." You are not refusing inspection. You are asking for your right to a proper legal process. As a green card holder, you often have the right to have serious questions about your status decided in immigration court rather than at the airport counter. In court, a judge can look at the full picture: your biometric travel record, your work history, tax filings, housing, family situation, and any evidence you can provide to show that your main home remained in the U.S. In many cases, people who faced difficult questioning at the border were later able to demonstrate to a judge that they had not abandoned their permanent residence because their ties to the U.S. remained strong and their long trip, while extended, was still temporary. That process exists precisely because the law recognizes that life is complex. A single long trip by itself should not automatically erase years of residence unless the surrounding facts clearly show that you have moved your life elsewhere. Hearing all this, you might be tempted to think, Maybe the safest thing is to never leave the U.S. at all. But for most people, that's not realistic. Parents and grandparents age and may need care. Family members get sick. Important life events like weddings, births, and funerals happen overseas. Businesses and properties in your home country might require attention. Emergencies rarely happen at convenient times. For many permanent residents, international travel isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. The goal is not to keep you trapped in the United States. The goal is for you to travel in an informed, strategic way, understanding what the system sees and how your decisions may be interpreted. If you know in advance that you may need to stay outside the U.S. for a longer period, many months, or close to a year or more, there are tools that can help manage the risk. One of the most important is a reentry permit. This is a travel document you apply for while you are physically present in the U.S. before you leave. It doesn't give you unlimited freedom to remain abroad indefinitely, but it does indicate that you told the U.S. government in advance that you expected to be away for an extended time and that you intended to keep your U.S. residence. When you come back and present a valid reentry permit alongside your green card, officers often view your situation differently from someone who returns after a long absence with no preparation. In addition to formal documents, your everyday choices have a big impact. If you expect to be away for several months, ask yourself, can I keep my U.S. lease or home during this time? Can I maintain my job or at least a clear connection to a U.S. employer? Am I continuing to file U.S. tax returns as a resident? Are my main bank accounts, driver's license, and mailing address still in the U.S.? These are the kinds of details officers and judges look at when deciding whether your true home remains in the United States. If your plans change while you're abroad, for example, a planned 2-month visit turns into an 8-month stay, it's often wise to speak with an immigration attorney before you return to the U.S. Even a short consultation can help you understand how your particular case might be seen, what documents to bring, and how to explain your situation clearly and accurately at the border. Preparing before you stand in front of the officer is almost always easier than trying to fix a problem after it has already started at the airport. Stepping back, the biometric entry-exit system is part of a wider shift in how borders operate. For decades, border checks relied mainly on paper, passports, ink stamps, and brief conversations. Now they rely increasingly on data, facial recognition, digital travel histories, and linked databases. From the government's perspective, this can make the process more efficient and reduce uncertainty. There's less guessing about where you have been and for how long. From a traveler's perspective, it means your travel patterns are visible in a way they never were before. Long absences stand out immediately. Repeated extended trips can start to look like a pattern rather than an exception. This doesn't mean green card holders are being forbidden from traveling, but it does mean that some old assumptions like, my green card protects me no matter how long I'm gone, or if I tell my full emotional story they'll understand, are now much less reliable. The system already knows how many days you've been away. Officers are trained to look for signs that someone may have moved their primary residence elsewhere. Your role is to arrive prepared, with your facts, your ties, and your communication under control. So let's return to that moment at JFK. You've just landed. You're tired. Your green card is scanned. The camera takes your picture. Somewhere in a database, your last departure is matched to today's arrival, and the exact number of days you were abroad appears on the screen. Perhaps a small alert appears because your absence exceeded 6 months. The officer looks up and asks, "Why were you outside the United States for so long?" If you didn't understand any of this, that question might feel like a sudden trap. You might panic, talk too much, sign something you don't fully read, or walk out of the airport with a problem that could have been avoided. If you do understand how the system works, that same moment becomes much more manageable. You know the officer already sees your travel history. You know that a long absence raises questions about residence, but does not automatically cancel your status. You know the law looks at the full picture of your life, not just the length of one trip. And you know that your best protection is to answer calmly, truthfully, and briefly, while clearly emphasizing the key reality. Your home, your work, your family, and your daily life are in the United States, and your time abroad was temporary. Knowledge doesn't remove every risk, but it changes your position completely. Instead of walking up to the counter in the dark, you approach it already aware of what's on the officer's screen and how your answers might be summarized. In a system that is becoming more automated and data-driven every year, that kind of preparation is one of the most effective tools you can have. If you know other green card holders who travel frequently or are planning long trips for family or work reasons, consider sharing this information with them before they fly. Many people only learn about these issues after they've already been flagged, and at that point, the situation can be much harder to correct. Staying informed, planning ahead, and understanding your rights can help protect not just a single trip, but your long-term ability to live and build a future in the United States. I'm Artur, and I'll see you in the next video.